Okay, so we've got one viewer so far. Hello. Not sure who you are, but welcome. Just give it a couple of minutes. Oh, someone else. Hello. Good to see you. Right, I'll kick off. So I wanted to do this because on a lot of my videos, I get quite a few people asking me questions in the comments. So I figured, why not? Let's just bash out a load in one go. So yeah. So the first one I've got is from Lewis on Instagram, and he asked me what are the viable species to target on the fly on the south coast. And this is a funny question coming from him because he actually won the multi-species prize at the Orbis Festival last year. So maybe you could help me out here. But yeah, the two main ones are bass and mullet. They're kind of what everyone thinks of. Generally, if you're fishing from the shore on a floating line, then bass and mullet are going to be your target. But you can catch mackerel as well, garfish. People have caught flounder nearer the bottom in shallow water on beaches. But then you've also got some other options. So I guess if you wanted to, maybe bream or wrasse with like intermediates or sinking lines in the right places, then they're more than possible to catch. But yeah, generally, bass and mullet are available. They're there. So that's kind of like the main fish that we target on the fly. Next one is from Justin, who also sent his question on Instagram. And he put, what features do I find offer the best marks for bass on the fly? So for me, like generally the fish that I've caught, the places where I've caught most fish have a narrow channel with quite a lot of flow. And the narrow channel might be entering into a pool that dries up at low tide, or it might be, I don't know, crossing a higher elevation part of the shore, or going into saltwater marshes. So it's kind of a place where the fish are going to want to move through, and it gives you an opportunity to ambush them as they move through that point. So in a couple of my videos this year, I've been fishing at a mark where there's two high gravel banks and they kind of come together, and there's this dip. And as the tide comes in, tide comes up, it goes through the dip, fills up the sort of like pool behind it, I guess. So that point, the fish are all going to want to get through there. It's quite a small space, so it's a good place to position yourself and ambush them. So if you can find somewhere that the fish are going to move through, then you've got somewhere where you can ambush the fish yourself while they're trying to ambush their prey. So the next one is from a guy called Zero Justice on YouTube, and he put, as a lure bass angler, he wants to try fly fishing, but he wants to know if it's going to be hard for him to learn how to do. So, well, I guess I've been fly fishing for about 15 years. And even when I started saltwater fly fishing, getting the hang of casting big flies with bigger, heavier lines was a bit of a learning curve, even though I'd been casting a fly rod for quite some time. So I would personally suggest, if you're totally new to it, invest in a casting lesson. Go and see a casting instructor, even if it's just for half an hour, just to get that kind of start with your cast. Because it's difficult because some people will pick it up quickly, other people might not pick it up so quickly. So if you've got someone that can just tell you how to do it and what you do it to start with for half an hour, 45 minutes or whatever, then they're going to quickly sort of correct any quirks that you might have. So yeah, I would suggest that would probably be the best thing to do. If you don't want to do that, buy a cheap fly rod, go and practice casting it in a field, and get the hang of it. But then as soon as you get out on the salt, you've got wind to deal with. And then obviously now you're fishing with the line on the water. That introduces a bit of a different feel to how you cast. So yeah, I mean, you've got to invest money in lessons or invest time in just getting the technique down. But I wouldn't try and let that put you off. It's so different to using spin tackle. And the sort of the feel, I personally find I enjoy casting. Some people don't, but actually playing the fish on a fly rod is such a different experience to spin tackle that I would highly recommend that you at least give it a try. Because once you've sort of experienced it, then you'll probably want to do it more. So then you'll sort of have the motivation to invest more in it, and go from there. And then, haven't seen any questions pop up in the chat yet, but my man Henry has sent me a whole list as long as my arm, so I can keep going. So the first one from Henry was, do I use mapping software or paper maps to look for marks? And what are you looking for? I personally just use Google Maps. It's free, it's there. You can look at anywhere with a satellite image, and the satellite image is going to tell you a lot about the place that you're looking at. So what I find quite interesting, and it's useful, is that most of the satellite imagery on Google Maps, when you zoom in, it shows you what it looks like at low tide. So you can see channels where, the gullies and stuff come up into like harbors or the mouths of rivers and that kind of thing. Obviously at beaches, there's not so much of that going on, but you can see where there might be flow, particularly as the tide rises above those channels. And also I personally find that I can see where weed is, because there's often like speckly black patches, and you can kind of tell whether you're looking at mud or whether you're looking at gravel as well. So it just gives you a general idea of what to expect when you get there, and you can see where potential features will be, like with the gullies and stuff. I mean, in terms of other options, I guess you could use like an OS map, but personally, I guess for me, Google Maps, I mean, you can see topography and stuff on an OS map and you can see where water is, but what Google Maps gives you as an advantage over that is, you can see channels, you can see what the substrate looks like, whether it's, like I said, gravel or mud or whatever. And it just, it works for me. I've been using it pretty much since I started out, and I find that it's really useful. What is also useful about it is that when you need to find somewhere to park, you can use Street View and stuff to see if there's free parking or street parking available near enough that you can walk, or you can find car parks as well, which is always handy. And then sometimes, like if there's a coastal path, people will often walk along it with a 360 camera, and they'll upload that to Google, and then you can see all of their images that they've taken with the 360 camera, look around like Street View. Some people even take drone photos, which is quite handy as well. And then you can see like the entire area from above, a bit closer than the satellite image, and get a bit more of a feel for what it's going to be like. And so it's an invaluable tool. It's free. I think there's even like a pro version that you can download and install on your computer. I'm not sure if it's free or not, but I've seen guys like look up marks with that on like YouTube and stuff, and you can measure distances, figure out how long it's going to take to walk somewhere if you've got a long hike. So personally, I'd say that's all you need. There's other options, like I say, but that's what I use. Next one. So best sources of information to find information on where to fish and when. So what I would say about this is that I've done a lot of reading, watching YouTube stuff like we all do. And as much you can read as much as you like, watch as much as you like, but as soon as you get to your first mark, the first time you fish, it's kind of goes out the window, really. I mean, yes, you've got the knowledge, but until you actually fish and experience the change of the tide going from low to high, high to low, and see your marks at low tide as well, so you understand what's underneath the water, it's difficult to kind of get that from a book, if that makes sense. So I would say, I mean, yeah, personally, I'd say time on the water is going to give you the most information and the most useful information, because it's your mark and it's where you're going to fish. So other than that, I would personally say books from, you know, guys like Henry Gilby and people like that that have got loads of experience. If you read books like that, that's obviously going to be really solid information. You can look at blogs and stuff on the internet, but these guys have spent their whole lives bass fishing and, you know, poured all of that into books and stuff. And I think that is possibly the only other avenue other than, you know, other than Facebook and YouTube and stuff that we all have access to and use on a regular basis. So yeah, next one. What sort of tide stage is ideal? And when would you not fish because of the tide? So, I mean, personally, I would say any stage of the tide is fishable. If you can find the right mark. If it's a muddy mark and it's low tide, you might have to walk across 100 yards of mud knee deep, and that's probably not a clever idea. I personally avoid that. But the only situation that I would say isn't as productive is probably slack water. Slack water can, just from my experience when I've been fishing, don't tend to catch so many fish when you get that kind of like short period when there's absolutely no flow. It might be the very peak of high or the very peak of low, and it's just less productive for me. The only exception to that rule is on some estuaries you get like salt marshes that may be kind of contained as like pools, and when they fill up and the fish can get in there, because at low it might be totally dry and the fish can't get in there, that's, you know, the fish go in there and they feed because there's now access to all the nutrients that are in there, or the bait fish go in there to hide, so the bass follow them in. So that is the only exception to that rule for me, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there's like no flow necessarily, but this, yeah, it's the only kind of situation. And one example of that recently was on my top water video that I did recently, and the fish that I caught at the end of that was in a salt marsh, and the bass had gone in there to chase the bait fish. The water was slack. It wasn't like it was using the flow, it was using the small contained space to hunt those fish. So yeah, the salt marshes at slack water is fine. Otherwise, if the tide's going up, tide's going down, and if there's flow, there's going to be an opportunity somewhere to find fish. Next one that Henry's put is what and why would make a certain place unappealing to fish? That's a difficult question because I think everywhere has potential. It's just some places are going to have more potential than others. So, you know, you might look at a beach and say there's no features for, you know, 500 meters. That's not to say that there's not going to be fish there. If there's, you know, patches of sand, that could be classed as a feature, but it's just that there's less features than, say, I don't know, a bay on the just inside a harbour or something. So yeah, that's a difficult question to answer. I think you'll have an instinctual feeling about that kind of thing when you're on the water. So yeah, get out and fish, have a look, and sort of feel for yourself what you think about somewhere. If there's lots of structure, lots of flow, then, you know, you're going to feel confident. Whereas if it's just like slack water on a beach, it's not to say you won't catch a fish, but it might just not have that kind of, might not put that confidence in you that there'll be fish there. Okay, and the next question is one that I get asked a lot in the comment sections of my videos, and I do repeat myself quite a lot, and it's generally follows the question of what weight rod do you fish with. So I'll answer that question as well. I personally fish an 8-weight rod. I just find it's ideal for the size of flies that I fish, and it's not too heavy that it's still fun to play the fish. If you go up to a 9 weight, then I would say that's probably okay for if you want to get more distance, if you're, say, fishing off a beach. Whereas I fish a lot of like quite close range marks, I guess, like pinch points and salt marshes and areas like that. So yeah, the 8 weight is quite good for me. I want to try a 6 weight, but it would be definitely when there's definitely not going to be much wind if I'm trying to cast bigger flies. For mullet, then I would just a 6 weight generally, maybe a 5 weight. But yeah, in terms of leaders for bass, I just have my fly line with a loop to loop connection onto a butt section, which is 5 foot long, and that is, I think it's about 35 or 40 pound fluorocarbon. There's about 5 foot of that to another loop to loop connection to basically my tip hit, which is just the other half of the leader. Really, I can have 3 to 5 feet of 15 pound or maybe 10 pound fluoro. So that's a really simple leader setup. You can, build tapered leaders or use pre-made tapered leaders. It's totally up to you. But I personally find that for casting bass flies, just a nice thick butt section, about 5 foot of that, and then at least 3 foot of tippet added onto that. I might go a bit longer if it's a bit calm and you want to sort of be a bit more stealthy, but generally on the whole, that's all you need. For mullet, I mean, I've not got tons of experience fishing for mullet. I've fished for them a lot, but I've only caught one, so can't really speak from experience in terms of how it affects the fish. But in terms of casting, I use it's a 10 foot, but it's cut down from 12, so it's a bonefish tapered fluorocarbon leader. I want to say it's 15 pounds, and I cut it down to 10 foot, so I cut 2 foot off the tip section, put a loop to loop perfection loop on the end of that, and then just add probably about 4 foot of tippet on there, maybe 5, and then a tire dropper on there as well, and fish 2 flies. But yeah, the tippet on that will be fairly similar to what I use on my bass rigs, but I'll probably go to the 10 pound rather than the 15. Might even go as low as 8. I actually used 8 pound tippet when I actually caught a mullet last year, and it didn't take any line and it didn't break me off. So I'd say 8 pound is probably okay. Right. Do I fish more than one fly at all for bass? I've never done that. And it's not something I've ever thought about, actually. It could be something that could work if you were fishing smaller flies, maybe, or maybe had a big fly with a smaller fly trailing off from it. Maybe having like a shrimp fly tailing off from a bigger bait fish, maybe. But yeah, I mean, generally for bass, I've always fished one, and I think the majority of people probably do the same if they're fishing bigger flies. I know a lot of guys that mullet fish catch bass as bycatch, and they're going to be fishing multiple fly rigs for mullet. So I guess you're targeting mullet, but you might catch a bass. So that's a bit of a different situation. But yeah, I mean, why not give it a try? Who knows? It might be a winning idea. Right. Okay. Still nothing in the Q&A, I don't think. So yeah. So please feel free to ask away. But I've still got questions from Henry. So Henry's asked, where are good places to start out? So he's put that looking for marks is fun, but with trout fishing, you can go to a lake or a river that's well known to experience the sport fully before you find the confidence to seek out your own spots. That's a fair point. It'd be great if, I could say go to XYZ and you'll catch a bass. But even if I was to give you my best mark and say, go there at this time on this day, you still might not catch a fish. It's a bit of a different animal to freshwater fishing generally. So I would say, unfortunately, you're probably going to have to go somewhere and put the time in to really understand it before you'll start catching fish. I mean, I didn't catch a decent sized bass in my first saltwater season. I think I had 2 little miniature ones and a few baby gilthead bream. The following year, I think it took me probably till June to actually catch a bass that was over 30 centimeters. So it's all, I think, unfortunately, it's all about putting the time in and figuring your marks out, and you know how they behave, how they respond to different conditions, whether that's weather, tide, wind, all sorts. But yeah, I think it is just a bit of putting the work in. And his next one is there anything to be aware of when unhooking bass? I've never had to hold a fish in its mouth, so I'm only aware of that by watching others. It will be good to know why people do and what's the acceptable way. So I mouth grip bass because if you put your hand around a bass, you're probably going to get spiked by its fins, or its gill plates, which are quite sharp. Um, Not necessarily going to cause a lot of damage, but it's not very comfortable. And it's also quite a secure way to keep hold of the fish while you're unhooking it, particularly if it's deep hooked and you need to get some pliers out or something. If you've got it lip grip, they also open their mouths, which is convenient for getting the hook out. Whereas if you, I guess, had them let out flat on the floor, they shut their mouths generally. Luckily, not as difficult to unhook as pike, which takes a bit more finesse in doing. But yeah, basically, I do it because it's secure. I'm less likely to drop the fish, particularly if I'm wading and I haven't actually netted the fish because it's not particularly big. Then, getting a lip grip on it and then just popping the fly out, and you can just drop the fish back, and you haven't had to handle it too much, which can be bad for the fish as well if you handle them too much. So yeah, hopefully that helps. Okay. So Henry's next question is, what tide tables do you use, and what looks like a good day to choose? So I don't have like loads of tide tables. Oh, hello. Okay, I'll come to you in a minute, Lance. So yeah, tide tables. So I use an app called Tide Times, and I use an app called Nortide, and these apps tell you the tide times, which is obviously going to be really helpful. And then you get like the moon phase, weather, wind speed and direction, all that kind of thing. So when I'm considering where I'm going to go, if the tide is going to be low, then I'll go to a mark that I know I can access the water at low water, because particularly around my area, there's lots of mud. So I don't want to be traipsing through too much mud, getting myself into sticky situations, particularly if I'm on my own. Whereas if it's high, or if it's going to be higher, then that opens up a few more places. But yeah, generally I'm going to be wanting to fish somewhere where there's going to be flow. So you don't, if you're too close to high or too close to low, then you're going to have to wait for the shift to happen and then the flow to come. And then I guess weather-wise, it's funny because people always say like it's better to fish for bass at night, and they don't like bright conditions. But 90% of the fish that I've caught have actually been in bright sunlight, which kind of is it's not an exception to the rule. I guess the rule is that generally, yes, you're going to catch bigger bass in lower light conditions because they'll feel more confident to come in and feed, but doesn't mean that you should rule out a bright sunny day. I also generally fish from early in the morning, so it's generally going to be a bit lower light as well. So yeah, I'm basically going to be looking at, I want to fish up to high or down from high, or up from low or down to low. I don't really want to be hanging around, because I fish shorter sessions. I don't want to be hanging around at high tide or at low tide for too long. I want that tide to be moving. Wind direction. So say I fish one side of the estuary as opposed to the other. If the wind's going to be in my face and it's going to be a strong wind, then that's going to cause problems with casting. So I'd like to have the wind on my back, or probably come in from the opposite hand. So say if I'm right-handed caster, I want the wind to be coming across from my left so that it's not blowing the line onto me. Whereas equally, if you're a left-handed caster, you want the wind to blow across from your right so that, again, it's not blowing the line into you. And then, yeah, as long as it's not peeing it down with rain as well, which I guess you shouldn't rule out either, because people do catch fish in the rain. It's not like it's affecting the fish, but if you don't want to have to stand in it for hours, then, that can be avoided. So yeah, so I guess another thing is the Nortide app is quite clever, because I don't personally understand moon phases and everything yet and how that affects fishing, but Nortide will give you a rating of how much fish activity it predicts at certain times, based on all of the conditions as well. So that's handy to look at, and quite interesting as well. So yeah, I mean, the main things I take into account, because I generally fish 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning till about 9 o'clock in the morning at the weekends. So the tides are what the tides are. So I'm basically looking at somewhere that's accessible, because of the tide state. Where's going to have the best wind direction if it's windy? If it's not going to be windy, then that opens up a lot more places. And then, yeah, other than that, that's kind of really the only things that I take into account. And then previous experience, where have I had better results? I'll generally, if I haven't been for a little while, I'll generally go somewhere where I've caught before, just to have that bit of confidence. But I'll also move, even when I'm fishing short sessions. You know, I'm quite lucky to have fishing from where I am in Southampton, you know, to Chichester and beyond. So between here and there, you know, there's about half an hour drive. If I want it, if things aren't happening at one place, then I can drive 10 minutes up the road and try somewhere else. And quite often that's actually been the thing that's changed it from a blank session to a session where I've caught a fish. I've changed location, and that's made all the difference. So yeah, hope that helps. Right, Lance, so your question is, do you strip the fly back slow or fast? So generally these days, if there's not too much flow, then I will strip. Generally, like, I'm going to pull 4 or 5 inches at sort of, you know, almost every second. So you're getting quite a sort of quick motion from the fly. Times that I will slow that down is if I am fishing in flow and it's a strong flow, then you let the flow do a bit more of the work. So I might cast, say the flow is coming from my right hand side across to my left, then you can cast into the flow. And if you cast into the flow, your fly is going to drift across to in front of you. You're going to want to pull the line in quite quickly, because otherwise you're going to get a bow in the line where the flow's pulling the line through. So yeah, you'd want to retrieve a bit quicker there just to keep contact with the fly. Whereas if I cast with the flow to my left a bit more and the fly drifts away from me, then that tension is going to be maintained by the flow pulling the fly away from me. So then I might slow down my retrieve to keep the fly in the area where the fish are hopefully going to take for a bit longer. But yeah, generally I'd say, I mean, it's kind of something that you sort of mix up on the day. I've never found that a slow retrieve has worked yet, but that's not to say that it wouldn't. But basically, you want your fly to look like a fleeing bait fish. So you're either going to sort of flick it, like strip quite quickly or hard, but not at too quick intervals, or then you can also speed it up as well. So sometimes I'll find that if I'm fishing a gurgler on the surface and I see that a fish has tried to take it, so often you'll see them try, they'll miss it, and then they'll come back around again sort of 2 or 3 strips later. So in those situations, I might pause, bass like a pause. If you pause your fly, then they'll often come back and hit it. So that's something always to sort of like try and mix into your retrieve, is put the odd pause in. But then also, if I have that situation where a bass has tried to hit it and it's missed, then I might slow down. And then if nothing happens for 2 or 3 strips, then speed up again, just vary it up. So yeah, so it's kind of just kind of, yeah, experiment really, and see how it goes. And then, right, tide tables. I do have one more question from Henry. So I will get to that. And then we've got, yeah, we're pretty much there for time. So I will answer Henry's question before we go. And then if anyone else does have any, feel free to drop them in. So Henry's last question was, how would you know if on your own that it's safe to wade out, and when would you not wade out on new ground? So that's a good question, because yeah, basically, if it's muddy, then it's risky, whatever, really. I've seen situations and heard stories from people where they're walking on the mud. It's not too bad. I mean, mud's always slippy, but in terms of the depth that they're sinking into it, it's not too bad. And then they walk, 10 steps in front of them, and then they're up to their waist in it, and it can vary. There can be these areas where it's unpredictable. So personally, I don't fish really muddy marks on my own. If I wanted to, I'd find a willing participant to come with me, and then you can explore it together. If someone gets stuck, you've got someone to help you out. Other ways of kind of getting around it is that some muddy marks, there'll be areas where there's a gravel spit, or I don't know, maybe there's an inlet, and where the inlet flows back out to the sea, that cuts all the mud away, and there's gravel on the bottom, and you can walk on that safely. So it's generally good to go and investigate these places at low tide first. I know for some people, they might not live so close to the coast, and having to go and do that and not necessarily be able to fish is a bit of a pain. So yeah, I mean, there's ways that you can kind of tell that it's going to be okay to walk on. Another one is bladderwrack. If there's patches of bladderwrack, that generally means that there's something for them to cling onto, like a stone or rocks or gravel. So if I'm going to a muddy mark, then I will look for areas where there's bladderwrack lying on the floor. That's generally going to be a bit safer to walk on. But yeah, gravel spits, I just would personally, if I'm fishing on my own, I'm going to avoid venturing out into just plain mud. It's just, you just don't know what to expect. I mean, if you're mullet fishing, unfortunately, that's often where they're going to be as well. So it's a tricky one. But yeah, hopefully that helps. So yeah, that kind of rounds things off, unless anyone else has got any questions, which I don't think we have at the moment. So, but yeah, thanks to the guys that have joined and watched. Appreciate your support, and yeah, I hope that I was able to help some people out with some useful info. So yeah, thanks very much, and I'll catch you on the next one.